Sorry,
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, everybody, for coming out tonight. I'm Scott Binder. I'm the president of the chapter. I don't have much to say tonight, but I'm going to kick it off with just a couple of logistics. First thing is first. Up on our screens is the sign-in sheet. Sign-in sheet meaning hold your phone up, take a picture of the code, and just fill out the rest. There's about 4 to 5 lines. That's how you're going to get your CPEs in a couple of weeks. I was just informed that our CPEs still haven't gone out from last month, so I'm going to go back and check that out and straighten that out. So if you were here last month and you did the same process, it's not your fault. I don't think you did anything wrong. I think it's our internal process, which I will double check. Before I forget, and I meant to mention this last month, I'm going to throw our website under the bus just a little bit because we're looking for help. Our website is old, outdated, not modernized. We could use a lot of help. So if anybody here or anybody knows of anybody that would like to help us out with our website, please see me or see anybody on the board, and we will gladly take all the help that we can get. And I'm also going to expand that out a little bit. If there's any high school kids that you know that want to help the chapter out, we will gladly take their help out as well. And as you know as well as I do, they are probably more in tune than we are with websites and what works and what's driving them to go to different websites. So again, we are looking for help. We will gladly take it. So again, please see myself or anybody else on the board. For people that are new here, bathrooms are actually on this side. So if you go through these doors, the bathrooms are right there. Food is out there. Please help yourself. Trash cans are in the back. Tom, do we know who our speaker is for next month yet?
No, and so I'm going to throw our director of programs under the bus. And I've been really preoccupied with trying to figure out what to do with my kids all summer. Yeah.
Cyber camp.
I can't afford cyber camp.
You can't send
cyber
them
camp
to
is
Uncle
$1,500 a week. They're not going to Girls Who Code either for the same reason. They're going to like church camp and doing stuff. Anyway, I haven't had time to focus on it. If anybody knows of an awesome speaker, I would really appreciate your help this month, and I promise I'll get my act together in July again. If I was going to go, I think Scott has a really good presentation teed up.
Okay. So again, we're open. If you know of any good speakers for next month, and I assume probably for July as well.
I'll have something for July.
Okay, for June. I think it's actually June 18th, it's the third Tuesday. That turns out to be June 18th. Again, like I said, I don't really have too many logistics to talk about tonight. I did peruse the ISSA.org. That's the international website. So there's a lot of good resources out there. So if you are looking for cybersecurity resources, both for personal or for corporate reasons, you can go check that out, especially if you're a member and you type in your login, your password to get into the website. Once you start digging in there, there's a lot of good resources there. And externally too, through the website, you don't have to be a member. They offer some resources as well. So I'm also going to start the conversation or the discussion point, and right now it is just some thoughts being generated, but some really good thoughts. So I was talking to David Jackson right up here, and David's actually written quite a few articles for the ISSA Journal, which they publish every month, different topics, different subjects, is really how they gear it every month. So David is really offering up his time, his resources, his expertise. And David is a lawyer by trade, practicing in information security. So David is offering up his expertise if anybody is interested in writing for the ISSA Journal. He's going to be thinking about how to help you, how to help the profession out in terms of creating and getting your thoughts down on paper cohesively in the structure that ISSA really likes it, so they can actually publish it. So this is, again, these are just thoughts, discussion points. Could be, maybe a year down the road that you're thinking about publishing, or it could be next month. I don't know. David doesn't know at this point. It could be one session. It could be a series of multiple sessions where you get your outlines together, get your thoughts together, progresses to the next step. And then there could be another training session as to funneling that into actual piece of writing. So, Dave, do you have any, you want to discuss anything more about that?
So what we started talking about is, a couple of months ago I said, Scott had me say a few words about writing an article, and I had just gotten an article published, which was the feature of the month. And what I tried to do is for the legal issue, since I'm an attorney and I kind of wanted to, help broaden that discussion. I usually publish, it's usually February's the lawyer issue, the legal issue. So I talked a little bit about, okay, so this is what I've done, and maybe there's interest. And then we were talking tonight, I said, I've been thinking about this. Why don't I do like 3 or 4 slides in the next month or so, and just kind of do this is my process for writing an article. And that way, kind of see if it germinates interest. And then my thought was either set up something like on a monthly basis and we just kind of get together and talk about where people are at, and maybe just kind of have a writing workshop. I'm open to it. Have to figure out the schedule and logistics for that. I can either do it in the evenings or weekends, but your schedule's vary, so I'm open to the idea. It would be a way for me to help you all out and contribute back.
So that's a big offer that David's offering, which is fantastic. So if you have thoughts or ideas, come see David and talk through that, and I'm sure he can make it happen. Again, it's fantastic to be published. We also have some other authors in the crowd here that have been published, but if you haven't, it's fantastic for your career. It's fantastic for a knowledge base. Again, the real way to have knowledge is to actually come up, speak about a topic, do a lot of research about a topic. We talked about this earlier, just grabbing a bite out there. Presenting on a topic is one of the best ways to actually help yourself out and help others out. And that's what this whole chapter is about. It's giving back to the profession, sharing your knowledge, networking. So again, the way this chapter's been run for years and years and years is basically on an informal basis. You see, I don't have any slides prepared. I talk off the cuff. Other chapters run things quite differently. Again, this seems to work for this chapter. So what we also like to do is, again, give back and talk about any prospective jobs or opportunities that anybody is aware of to help the profession out, help your fellow colleagues out. I think there's some job opportunities out there that we were talking about. I don't know if you want to speak on those.
Yeah, sure. So hi, I know some of you know me, but as you know, I work in the U.S. Senate Cyber Operations, and we just last week actually posted, I can't remember exactly, 10 or 11 positions. These are for employment, they're not contractors, but they're jobs in cybersecurity operations. So we're getting ready to do a whole bunch of hiring. In fact, one of my colleagues was today at a recruiting event, was actually here in D.C. Meet some people there. We'll be continuing to work, obviously, until we get those positions filled. It's on the Senate website under the Sergeant at Arms. You have to drill down a little bit to find it, but work you can find it, and you'll see the positions are there.
And again, if you send those to somebody anybody on the board, we will get those up on our website. That will link back to your website. So we'd be happy to do that as well.
Definitely, maybe I can get a business card.
Yep, absolutely. One of the last topics I want to talk about is becoming a member. If you're not currently a member already, our VP of membership is here. So let's speak on that.
As you guys probably know, we are a member organization. It's a very low cost to join. It's $100 a year, $25 for local kudos. I joined 5 years ago or so, and I've gotten a lot out of it. I just wanted to put it out there. One thing you guys might not be aware is that we rely on the members to continue doing this. We volunteer our time. The corporate sponsorship we had a few years ago has kind of dried up, and we do rely on members to join and renew. So keep that in mind. There are a lot of benefits to membership as well. There's a job board. We get the magazine, which comes digitally and in paper a few times a year. I enjoy that a lot. And there's opportunities to network. There are other events that sometimes we put on just for members. Discounts to classes, SANS discounts, and a number of other benefits. I'd be happy to talk to you if you guys would like to speak about it after the session tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it for my so-called prepared comments. Does anybody have any announcements or comments that they'd like to share with the group? All right, then it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for the night. We actually have two speakers, so the sessions can be broken up into two half sessions. The topics are authentication beyond SMS, and our first speaker is up here, Kelly Robinson. And the second half will be confidence as code, automated security testing in cloud environments. And Brad Giesemann will be speaking during our second half of the presentation for tonight. Kelly works on the account security team at Twilio in New York City, so she actually came down and flew down from New York City, staying in lovely Alexandria before they actually shut down the metro over the weekend. So maybe she'll get to use that tonight. She helps developers manage and secure customer identity in their software applications. So please welcome Kelly. Give a round of applause, please. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I met Tom back in January at ShmooCon in DC, and it took us 4 months to get me down here, but I'm glad to be here. Thank you, Tom, for inviting me. If any of you haven't been to ShmooCon before, it was a lot of fun. It's a really great event, so it was really exciting to make some connections in this area and on the East Coast because I just moved back to New York from San Francisco. So I'm going to be talking about two-factor authentication tonight. This talk is basically going to introduce some of the different ways that you can implement two-factor authentication, get into some of the technical details, and show you some of the best practices. If you're not somebody that is building websites that might have authentication built into them, or if it's not something that you do in your day-to-day job, that's okay because two-factor authentication is becoming part of all of our lives as consumers as well, and so this will probably be informative to you as a consumer as well. But first, I really need to make a statement about the glorious corner of the internet that is stock photos of hackers. So this guy, I don't know if you can tell, for one, somebody just pointed this out to me that I never noticed this before. He has two laptops, and he's hacking both of them at the same time. And he's so good at his job that he actually got the word hacked to show up on the left one. So I think we should just really appreciate this guy. So thank you again for the intro. My name is Kelly Robinson. I work at a company called Twilio. Has anybody heard of Twilio? Wow, like half the room, so cool. For those of you that don't know Twilio, we are a communications company, so we provide the API layer between different types of communications, usually between a human and a machine. We do a lot of stuff with phone numbers, and so we are kind of the middleman. If you ever need to call your Lyft driver, your Uber driver, you're actually calling a Twilio number that then gets routed to your Uber driver. You call into Casper Mattresses, that IVR phone number that they have on the top of their customer support is a Twilio number. So you can build a lot of stuff with our services. I work on the authentication side of the business, and so Twilio acquired a company called Authy about 5 years ago. Is anybody an Authy user here? A handful. So Authy is most well known as a two-factor authentication app, but we also have APIs behind the scene for adding 2FA into your applications. And so Authy was a big user of Twilio with sending a lot of SMS-based two-factor authentication messages, and Twilio decided that the authentication side of the business was something that they wanted to really dial into, and so they acquired Authy back in 2014. So I work on the APIs for things like 2FA and phone verification, and I also just spend a good chunk of my day educating developers about best practices around authentication and identity management. And so this talk is kind of going to dive into some of those things that I've learned in the last 2 years of me working for that company. So why does 2FA exist? 2FA exists because passwords are bad. And passwords are bad because passwords ask people to remember things, and people are bad at remembering things. So most people have passwords that are short and guessable, or they're reusing passwords all over the web. And that's problematic because if one of those password sites gets compromised and hackers can buy those compromised or leaked credentials, then they'll basically try to use those credentials to get back into your email account, your Apple account, any kind of account where they can go buy expensive things or make money off the fact that they can get access to what's behind the authenticated session, and that's known as credential stuffing. And hackers make a lot of money off of this. Like, it's $1 trillion business that you can do every single year. There's a lot of money to be made by hacking into other consumers' accounts. And you've probably heard more about all these breach notifications that you're getting all the time now. You're seeing all these companies like Equifax and all these other types of businesses that are getting things leaked and hacked into. And that's becoming more and more problematic because more and more people have more online accounts and they're reusing passwords in more places. So you might think that nobody's that dumb to have their password be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but it turns out that 22 million people are, and that's according to this website, Have I Been Owned? It's a project from security researcher Troy Hunt. Does anybody have an account on this website? A couple. So if you go to the address at the top of the screen there, if you want to take a picture of that, it's really interesting because basically what he does, he captures all of these breached. Anytime a new company gets breached, if you put your email into his database, he will send you an email if your email is seen in that data breach. And then that's a good way for you to know, oh, my email was seen. It doesn't really matter that you're giving Troy Hunt your email because hackers already have it at that point, right? And so, I'm subscribed to this, and then if there's something that's like Yahoo or Tumblr or one of these sites that gets breached, and then you're like, oh wait, I still have a Yahoo account, maybe I should go change my password there or something like that. So it's a good kind of reminder for you to go take inventory of where you have accounts all over the web and know the places that you might have a security vulnerability. So this password is incredibly common, and it turns out most of the top passwords are pretty simplistic passwords because, again, people don't want to have to remember complicated things. And so these passwords, these don't really change, right? They're always, these top 12 are always going to be the same types of things. It's all sequential numbers or ABC 1, 2, 3. The only exception here is when a major site like MySpace gets hacked. The password MySpace1 was seen 700,000 times after MySpace was hacked. And so people aren't that creative when they're making up their passwords. They're using the name of the site that they're using. Sometimes people have formulas. Maybe you're like this guy and you're like, oh, I know, this website's telling me that I have to add numbers and special characters in my password, so I'm gonna add 1, 2, 3 and an exclamation point to the end of it. And like, if you're like me, you're like, oh crap, I've totally done that before. Maybe I should go change those passwords. But that's, because a lot of these standards and what we thought of as best practices for passwords weren't actually making them more secure. And so the National Institute of Standards and Technology had this recommendation for having things like character requirements, having things like numbers and special characters in your passwords. And it wasn't until 2016 that they actually changed the recommendation to just recommend a minimum length. Because as math tells us, the longer your password is, the more guesses it's going to try somebody to brute force it. And so the only thing that really guarantees your password is more secure is making it longer. But passwords aren't enough, and a lot of websites haven't enforced that you have, 16-character passwords. It's not reasonable for a lot of websites to enforce that because not everybody is using something like a password manager. And so I can't remember 16-character passwords that are unique for all of the hundreds of sites that I use across the internet. And so I think we're not going to see password requirements change that much, but we are going to see is this idea of multi-factor authentication changing more. So this guy, there's like money on the keyboard, and he's wearing gloves at the same time. Like, it doesn't seem practical, but I really want to be like in the room with that photographer while they were doing the art direction for that shoot. I'm sure it would have been interesting. So when it comes to authentication and multi-factor, there are 3 different types of factors that you have. And that's something that you know, and that would be like a password. That's something that you have, that would be something like a key or a mobile phone. And then there's something that you are, and that's biometric data like your fingerprint or retina scan or something like that. So a classic example of this, a multi-factor authentication is a debit card and a PIN number. Something you have is a debit card and the PIN number is something that you know. That's 2 different things that you need in order to withdraw money from your debit or checking account. And so that's a more secure way unless, because otherwise if somebody was to steal your debit card, they would be able to get money from your account. And so having the multi-factor authentication on your bank account makes sense. But let's talk about Reddit. I think one of the things that most people have been doing lately is if you enroll in 2-factor authentication, you're usually getting a text message or the second factor with something you have, which is through your phone, and that's through the SMS-based text message 2FA. So about a year ago, Reddit announced that they had a security incident, and they did a really good job of kind of reporting on how they handled it and what happened. And so they reported that employee accounts were compromised, and that data was stolen from cloud and source hosting providers, so probably like AWS and GitHub. And so the hackers got access to some sensitive information, like basically the source code of Reddit, and potentially like the machines that Reddit was running on. But the interesting thing about this is that Reddit had actually enforced that all of their employees had 2-factor authentication on all of those services. And in their security announcement, what they said is we learned that SMS-based 2-factor authentication was not nearly as secure as we had hoped, which is interesting because it is adding that extra layer, but there might be some security flaws in that. So that's the working theory, is that somebody was able to bypass the 2FA by hijacking something to do with their SMS. And like I mentioned, SMS is like the most common form of 2-factor authentication. It's the most zero friction form. Most people now have a cell phone number that they can receive text messages at. It doesn't require you to install anything, and so that's usually the lowest barrier to entry for people to turn on 2-factor authentication. This is my acronym slide. I tried to add as many as I could on there. I will actually explain what all these are. But, so SMS 2FA is, like, some people say that this is bad and insecure. And I do think this is a little overblown, but I want to explain the reasons that people are talking about this because this does matter. And so the first thing is the SS7 vulnerability. And the way that this works is telephony companies were set up in, most of them in like the 1970s and 1980s. A lot of the necessity to communicate between telephony companies and carriers in different countries wasn't really happening until the last like 30 years. And so SS7 is a protocol, it's the signaling system 7. It did follow signaling system 6. I don't really know how it's different, but anyway, there's some flaws in signaling system 7 that basically say if I am Kelly and I have a carrier Verizon in the United States, if I go travel to Colombia to work out of our Bogota office and then somebody wants to try to call me at my Verizon number, Verizon's like, oh, hey, actually, like, she's traveling right now, and then I forget the name of the carrier in Colombia, Movistar in Colombia is like, hey, can we have her call, like, can we receive it, we see that she's roaming here, and then they basically just like say, yeah, send her call to me. The handoff between Verizon and Movistar there is like, basically like, yeah, cool. Like, there's not really a security layer there. It does require a little bit of like finesse and knowing how the system works to pretend to be a carrier, but it is possible to do that. And so this is how some people are basically taking advantage of the system and trying to get around SMS-based 2FA is they basically pretend to be a carrier and then get access to your text messages by getting them forwarded to their fake carrier. Again, this is something that's like not going to really happen to a lot of people, but you know, we're in DC, you have government contacts here, like this is something that like if you are a high level government official, this is like targeted nation state type activity that is going to happen. Like this is how people are going to take advantage of this. When I give this talk to like a room full of web developers in San Francisco, I'm like, you guys are probably fine. Like no one's actually trying to like attack you with SS7. The thing that like most people are more vulnerable to right now is this idea of SIM swapping, which basically involves some social engineering. And so this is the idea that if, you know, like I have a vindictive friend that really wants to get back at me, calls into Verizon, pretends to be me, and gets Verizon to send a new SIM card to my friend's address because, you know, I lost my SIM card or something like that. It does involve you convincing the carrier to basically say that you've like lost your access to your phone and get them to reset all of that, but this is possible. Like humans are fallible. I was telling a story earlier of how I successfully phished myself to do some research for another project that I'm working on. But you know, contact center agents are trying to be helpful all the time, and so if you've ever witnessed or seen any of these videos about social engineering, it's pretty easy to get a lot of this information because the person on the other end of the line is just trying to help you out. And so that's how SIM swapping can happen, and that's how a lot of people are falling victim to this. You're seeing this a lot more with things like Bitcoin and people that have large transactions. Like if people are tweeting about the number of Bitcoin that they have, a lot of people are upset to learn that then they become victims of SIM swapping because people learned that they could make a lot of money off of getting access to their accounts. Question?
Two comments actually. The second one related, the first one related to SIM swapping. I think that's relatively uncommon, and it involves an adversary tricking, say, the mobile phone company into allowing something to happen that they shouldn't allow. In other words, the policy disallows that, yet the customer service rep makes a mistake and allows it anyway, and that's how the SIM gets...
Yeah, it's social engineering.
So,
yes, sir.
I'd have to argue with you. It's exceedingly common. Lori Craner wrote about it when she was CTO at the Federal Trade Commission, because it happened to her. It's a common scam to go into a Verizon store or another store and say you lost your phone and you want to upgrade. And to steal the account, walk out with several $1,000s worth of phones and with the cell phone number. It's easily done.
Yeah, it's DeRay McKesson, who is a civil rights activist, had this happen to his Twitter account. There's a lot of people. They're usually still high profile people.
But I'd like to see the actual...
But I would also argue that the SS7 attacking on developers in Silicon Valley is also quite common. And it's common because it's a great way to get access to confidential information. It's very, very valuable.
Yeah, it takes some finesse though.
Yeah, I would like to see the statistics on it, because there's a lot of FUD about this. It is a serious problem, and SS7 is a half-century protocol. But the real problem comes in certain countries where the established operators allow a new operator in that they shouldn't, and that new operator is the one who's who's engaging in, shall we say, dodgy behavior with respect to signaling system setup.
Yeah, there's a lot of history about this that I could go into. It sounds like he's a really good talk for next month.
That's right.
All right, I'm going to talk more about some of the alternatives to SMS if we're not going to be using this, because there are other options out there for using 2FA. And so something that we're seeing more of now, so YubiKeys, this is a new standard, newish standard. So a lot of these are replacing things like the old RSA tokens. So this would be something that you have. Push notifications, so this is something that you would get with something like Duo or Authy or another app-based authorization to say, like, is this you trying to log in, yes or no? And then TOTP, which is time-based one-time passwords, which you might get with an app like Authy or Google Authenticator. And that's probably the most common of these three options right now. And so we'll talk through some of those. And so does anybody here use YubiKeys? Yeah, so this is something that you're starting to see. It's more common in companies, so this is for like employee accounts. The big battle here is that YubiKeys are something physical that you have to have. It's not something just like an app that you can install on your phone. And so you basically have to have, and the easiest way to do this is to have like an IT administrator that can then like distribute this to you on your first day of work, right? This is what we do at Twilio for all of our engineers so that they can get access to the systems that way. Push authorization, there's a little graphic here that kind of shows how that works. So if you basically log into a website, it will show you how you can log in. And so basically once you do the login notification, movie's not playing, but it will say, is this you trying to log in, yes or no? And then the last one that I wanted to talk about was this idea of time-based on one-time passwords. And so you might hear the term OTP, which is just like one-time password. That's kind of a generic term that might refer to something like an SMS token. But TOTP is actually a standardized thing. It was built on top of HOTP, and so this is something that there's an RFC for it, there's a formula for it, and so anywhere that it says scan this code, like this QR code with Authy or Google Authenticator, you can use your Authenticator app of choice there because all of them are using the same type of formula to derive that 6-digit expiring token. So let's talk about how this works. Let's do some math. This will be fun. And so this is also going to show why this works without a cell phone service. And so what you start with is the secret key. And this is shared across devices. And so that's what's getting shared when you scan that QR code the first time. And so the secret key is stored on both the device and the server of the website that you're trying to authenticate. That's the first input. And the second input is the current system time. And then we'll normalize that to some kind of input period so that the code isn't changing every millisecond. And then we'll mix those together using a hashing function. And then we will truncate that into a 6-digit number. And so that's how we kind of end up with that. I did have a little example here of how you could do this with Python. And so this is something that doesn't take that much code to do if you want to implement this yourself. This is using a Python library called PyOTP. And you can see how you generate the secret, check the code, and then if you wait 30 seconds to try to verify it again, it no longer is valid. And so if this is something that you're interested in adding to your website, there's definitely a lot of tools out there for you to do this. But this is probably something that you should use a library for. There's a lot of people that have already built the integrations for stuff like this. So PyOTP for other Python things, that's most of the stuff that I work in. There's bcrypt, the Python cryptography library. If you work in other languages and want recommendations for other tools that you can use in your language, if I don't know one, I can probably find out somebody that has vetted something for a good recommendation. But let's talk about 2FA and you and how this would affect you and your website. And let's do that by first looking at, well, how did Reddit handle this situation, right? Like they learned that SMS was not an acceptable way for them to handle their employees.